Everyone I know has a story about either their own experience of autoimmune disease or someone they know who's really suffering from something deep that has been diagnosed as autoimmune disease. And the drugs that they use and the treatments they use maybe work a little bit for some period of time, but nothing really seems to work. And then we have this epidemic of people that are just suffering because they have autoimmune disease that's ruining their lives. And what is autoimmune disease? Like, just by definition, autoimmune, like the immune system is attacking itself. It's automatically happening. And this is the first place where, at some level, less so now, but this was happening about 20 years ago, people would be diagnosed with autoimmune disease, and eventually the doctors are like, well, you know, maybe it's not chronic Lyme disease or chronic Epstein-Barr or any of these things. Maybe it's just all in your head, and they're telling people to go get on, you know, like go to psychopharmacologists to take pills to make themselves happier, because it's clearly they're crazy. These symptoms don't matter. And then we look at this, we just have an epidemic of autoimmune disease around us. It seems like everyone we know has some version of it. And then in that version of it, some people's version of suffering from autoimmune disease is extremely severe and really intense. Autoimmune disease is really, I think, a misnamed phenomenon. I'm not denying the existence of autoimmune disease. I think that it's not autoimmune disease. It is a disease of the modern lifestyle. And what are the factors of a modern lifestyle that are contributing to overwhelming our system? We have way too many threads of information that we're responsible for coming in towards us. You know, it used to be we had a kitchen telephone in our house, maybe a telephone on our desk at work, and you know, and a mailbox where we had to take in the mail, and maybe a radio. And if we watched TV or we were in front of screens, we were, you know, consuming shows. We didn't have so much information that we needed to get from screens. It was more screens were a form of passive entertainment. In a modern lifestyle, we have a phone screen that we're getting information from constantly. Then we go to work and we have a monitor screen that we're getting information from constantly. Then people are texting us and people are calling us, and you know, and then we have emails and we have Instagram and we have Snapchat and all these threads of information that are bombarding us constantly. So that's one source of like, what is our overwhelm? Not to mention environmentally, like we have more chemicals that have been invented in the last 100 years, you know, and every year we're inventing more chemicals to make plastics better, to make better clothing, to make better paints, to make better cleaning products. But we're exposing our systems to chemicals, and chemicals being information that we've never exposed the human genome to before until this modern age. And then, you know, and then society, like let's look at society. Now, because we have all of these things in our society, society itself has a lot more facets of things we know about each other, things that we have to deal with about each other, on top of, because we're so connected to our information streams, which are very mental and dopamine dependent, we're losing the human connection that we have with our families, with our neighbors, within our communities. We're able to isolate more in the immediate term in order to connect more to abstraction. Autoimmune disease is a disease of modern overwhelm. And we're going through this epidemic. We're looking for the magic pill. Why are we looking for the magic pill? Well, the economics of finding the magic pill to deal with autoimmune disease makes sense. Let's give you a pill and you'll feel better and you'll buy it, and you know, drug company makes money and the economy goes forward and you don't have autoimmune disease. Like, you know, autoimmune disease, just as an economic cost for a country, it's expensive. How much lost productivity do we have because people are just suffering because their own bodies can't handle all the stress we're dealing with constantly? So if we invent a pill, it'll be great. We can feed that pill to the population and we can restore productivity. It doesn't work. Maybe it will work one day. It's not working right now. More and more people are getting diagnosed with autoimmune disease. More and more people are suffering, and we're not really finding a solution to prevent autoimmune disease. Maybe we have a couple of new developments with regard to how we treat autoimmune disease and how we manage the symptoms, but we're really not getting to the meat and potatoes of this whole problem, which is that humans, like humans in modern society are not as vital as we once were. We're losing our vitality. We're losing our ability to adapt to our environment. We've reached a maximum level of stimulus that we now either need to evolve into a new proto-human that can handle more stress, or we need to pull back on the amount of external stimulus and internal stimulus we're experiencing in order to be able to handle the stress that we're under. The place where we're really getting it wrong is we are looking outside of ourselves in order to fix this problem. From the Taoist perspective, and from my own experience with 20 years seeing people on tables and seeing this diagnosis of autoimmune disease get worse and worse and worse, the patterns that's emerged over that time is seeing how much we have alienated ourselves from the experience of our own body. And in this age of enlightenment, we're like, oh, autoimmune disease, well, maybe your white blood cell count's high. Maybe there's a blood test that will show it. But really, what we're missing is we're not looking at our own experience of self and seeing what are the triggers and the factors that are making us sick. What are the things that are keeping our systems from being able to adapt to the environment that we've put ourselves in? The place where modern medicine is getting it wrong is it's not about managing the symptom and making this one piece of overwhelm go away. It's really about learning how to be inside of our own bodies, having our own experience, and witnessing these types of things tend to stress me out more. Or normally this thing doesn't stress me out, but when I'm eating a standard American diet of processed seed oils and gluten that's treated with glyphosate, and I have all these other stresses, not to mention I'm washing my clothes with chemical-laden detergents, putting fragrances in all kinds of things, and cleaning with all kinds of things that are toxic to me, that when I don't do that, I start to feel a little bit better. So there's this additive level of, like, with each layer of stress, like if we are stressing ourselves out chemically with environmental exposure, then the other stress of what we're eating can become more stressful for us. If we're eating badly, our reactivity to pollen and environmental stresses also goes up. And so we have to be able to start to look at the whole of what we're doing to our bodies in the world. How many communication channels do we have open in a day? How much time do we spend on screens? How much time are we spending in what is meant to be productive, active mental behavior in a day? You know, and to probably understand that humans, generally, we have about 90 to 120 minutes of like focused mental activity inside of us each day after 8 hours of sleep. We don't have 8 hours in us like the standard 9-to-5 job would expect of us. How much of that are we doing? What about the food we're eating? Are we actually sitting down and eating with people we love from ingredients that are local and well-produced and not laden with fertilizers and insecticides? And are we not eating animals that were raised in a healthy way too? You know, there's a big difference between a cow that was raised in a pasture in the sunlight, eating green grass, versus a cow that was raised in a feedlot and fattened up in a highly stressful environment. Are we eating food that was stressed out too? You know, are we dealing well in our interpersonal relationships? Do we have intimacy in our lives? Intimacy and connection with people and feeling safe in our communities is a huge contributor to our well-being in the world and our sense, like our hormones really being balanced and non-reactive. So as we start to look at what is the experience that a person is having in their world, can we ground this experience and acknowledge what's working and what's not working on every single level in order to start to create less of an externally oriented world about, I should be more productive, I should be able to eat this food, I should be able to handle this stress, I should be, to what am I able to handle? What am I actually at capacity for dealing with in the world? And when there's autoimmune disease, it really requires that turning around and looking at oneself in the mirror and asking, is this what I really want? And if you ask me, when we're suffering from the disease of modern society, which is being labeled as autoimmune disease, we're not getting what we want. We're not having our basic needs met. What is our need to be safe inside of our bodies in this lifetime? When I was starting out my career, I was sort of the person of last resort for a lot of people. Like, I have this problem, I've been to the doctor, I've been to the specialist, I've been to the specialist of the specialist, and then I got a second opinion and nothing's really working out. in some ways I would sit and talk to somebody and be like, well, how can I help you? I'm suffering from this issue. And I'd be like, well, okay. And I'd sit with them and get to know them a little bit more. And I felt often that for a lot of people, just having that first connection of a human experience, a healer that was gonna listen to them as a human who was suffering, rather than try and like draw more blood work and look at them as an empirical data point that they're trying to correct. Just that level of connection put people at ease in a way that they started to feel better. And I thought it was always the acupuncture, but when I started doing more phone consultations or initial consultations by phone before I saw people in person, the feedback of like, well, I just felt better after talking to you. I felt like there was a way forward. It was a real cue for me that there's a piece, this, what I can only call this humanist piece of what we're doing that's incredibly important and often gets overlooked because we can't commodify humanism. We can't commodify the ability to connect and make someone feel seen and heard and safe and not judged. And then we're trying to commodify it in all these ways, AI sets and, to say, I appreciate you. There's a vocabulary of connection, and then there's the actual action of connection. So when people come to me and they really are seeking treatment, it depends on the level of how far out of alignment has their body become. Usually what ultimately becomes labeled autoimmune disease starts as, an ache or a injury that won't heal or a rash that comes and doesn't seem to go away, or some digestive trouble that's just persistent but not totally bothersome. And usually at that level, the treatment might be simple. Like if it's an ache, maybe we take some anti-inflammatories if it's irritated. If it's a rash, maybe we, put a cream on it and that soothes it. Maybe, if it's a gut issue, maybe we drink some herbal tea or some tannic things and, eat a little bit different. Like we avoid eating pizza and beer and we start eating more vegetables or more like, more well-rounded meals, and we feel a little bit better. It kind of keeps the symptoms at bay for a while. Or at the next tier, what if it's worse than that? Like that rash is really persistent and it gets really irritated looking, and or that ache is now becoming debilitating. I can't go on hikes anymore because this ache won't go away, or this gut issue is just like, yeah, I'm totally bloated every time I eat and it's not stopping. Well, that's like, then we go to the doctor for that, and they're like, taking out the next tier of ammunition for that. And we're moving away from, like small arms to bigger arms. And in the modern medical world, when we move to bigger arms, we're moving to steroids. So we put topical steroids on that rash that's really irritating, or we give you a cortisone injection in the joint that won't heal, or we give you some steroids to take orally to calm down your gut, or any other number of symptoms. Or I haven't even included the whole like panacea of, the whole medicine cabinet full of like emotional symptoms that come with autoimmune disease. Like, oh, you're depressed and anxious. And, first it's like, oh, go for a walk in the sun and, take a hot bath with Epsom salts. And then it's like, here's a pill, here's an anti-anxiety pill, here's a thing. Then people go through that process and they're trying to get better, but their life is still the same stressful. They're still working the same stressful job. They still haven't learned how to overcome their emotional wounds that they might have in their relationships or with their parents. They haven't learned how to eat better. They don't have access to good food. So the thing, like, we're putting Band-Aids on it, but we're not actually fixing the problem. And then we go forward. Now the problem gets worse. Now they can't eat. Like, they're getting malnourished because every time they eat, it's either massive diarrhea or massive pain. Or this joint problem has become so bad, like they're seeing signs of damage in the actual joint. The bones are changing shape. There's inflammation. There's pain, more pain. It's radiating everywhere. Or the rash is just like spreading all over the body. They can't sleep. Their skin's like, they're scratching their skin off because it's so itchy. Or their skin's just falling apart and there's like, it's looks like sores all over the body. Now they're using biologics and some like higher test things. They're taking things that they've found that will totally suppress our immune system to go against the natural machinery inside of our body to start to work against us. Or they'll, in the case of joint problem and joint breaking down, they'll cut us open and put plastic and metal parts inside of us to deal with the damaged joints. And this is really, when we look at modern medicine that is the absolute product of the Age of Enlightenment and the reductionist way of looking at every single thing as its component parts, at the end range of this, when we're dealing with autoimmune disease, we've dealt with all the component parts. In the case of the biologics, we're looking at the last component part of the immune system that's dysfunctioning, and then we're turning it off. In the case of the joint, we're like looking at the joint itself. Now we're cutting it out and replacing it. And in the case of skin stuff, we're turning off your immune system. And that's at the end of that game. Once we turn off your innate immune system, like, we've run out of options. There's not much left to do. And then we get there. I see a lot of people who've already gotten to this end range. We get there and we have to learn how to walk back from that edge, because when we keep going in that direction, we just keep damaging our life force more and more. We're taking what we go from doctor to doctor to doctor, go through protocol and protocol and protocol. Our life is a constant schedule of having to take our meds in the morning, eat a certain way. Doing the bare minimum to get by takes all of our effort. So how do we come back from that edge? We really have to take a step back and see, we have to pull all of the external stuff out of our system so that we can actually focus on getting better. We have to stop existing in that high pressure job. We have to do the work to forgive the people we live with and that we love and that are in our families, and overcome our emotional traumas. We have to learn how to eat better. That's a tough one. Actually eating better costs about twice as much to 3 times as much as eating whatever's available to us. It takes a lot of effort and thought to really start to pull in a way that your body can heal itself. Then once we're pulling in and we start to look at that focus of how are we going to heal ourselves, we're already so sick at that point that it can sometimes seem really overwhelming. In order to really make the shift, now if you're catching this early on, I just have some joint pain and I just have, maybe this little rash and I just have a little bit of digestive stuff, it's pretty easy to start to correct it. Let's clean up your environment. Let's clean up your stress load and let's clean up your intellectual stress load as well as your emotional stress load. Let's start to do some exercise and some movement that's gonna make your body healthier, that's gonna give you more space and help you breathe better so you have more energy. If we're all the way at the end range, if we've done everything Western medicine has to offer, we're totally sick, we don't know what to do, you're our last resort, then we do it one step at a time. First, we have to do the basic things. In order to get better, we have to be able to absorb good nutrition and we have to be able to sleep. Our body's not going to go into healing, be able to create its own healing processes unless we're able to restfully sleep. So we have to figure that out. And then we have to, in order for the body to heal, it has to rebuild tissue structures. So we have to make sure we're getting that nutrition in so that we can rebuild tissue structures. That's the first thing. Inside of that, you see how all of this is connected. Well, I can't afford to eat this way. It's too expensive. My family will never go for this. There's too much emotional stress. It's I have too much work to do. There's too much intellectual stress. The clues about how this is happening and why you can't get better, and why in some ways the cure is incredibly simple, but in other ways the cure is incredibly challenging to our ego. We have to actually acknowledge that we are sick and that our lives and our choices have made us sick and gotten us to this place. And in acknowledging that, we also acknowledge we have the power to change it. It might not be easy, but we have the power. What are the key takeaways of looking at this more holistic and Taoist perspective on autoimmune disease? When ancient Taoism was being developed as a philosophy and recorded, the human problems of the time were much simpler. That was a time before refrigeration and modern production techniques. So more of what people were dealing with was not having access to enough nutrition, not having access to quality nutrition. So food was rotten a lot of the time, or there was just not the right type of nutrition available. I mean, I can go to the supermarket here and I can get a banana from South America and avocados from Mexico, and I can get fish from the East Coast or the West Coast. I can get grass-fed cows, or I can get factory-raised cows. I have so many options. And, depending on what's right for me and what works for me, I can choose that. In ancient times, it was much simpler. It was like, what can I go out my door and within 5 miles get access to? And then markets were developing, and around this same time that knowledge was being developed and disseminated around healing. But in those days, it was much more, what were the common diseases that people were suffering from? They were suffering from malnutrition or just toxicity from rotten food. But fast forward to modern man. Now we have plenty of nutrition. Like with modern refrigeration and production techniques, we can, like I said, I can just go to the supermarket and get anything I want. So it's not a function of being malnourished. Every once in a while there's an E. coli outbreak, and and a bunch of people get sick and and sadly sometimes die because our guts are that weak that we really can't handle even like a little bug inside of us. But that's the reality. Modern man, we're dealing with this autoimmune epidemic, and that's really a function of us having way too many options and way too many stressors and way too much information coming at us all at once. So if you're watching this video and you're like, yeah, that's me. I am on this path. I want to get off this path. What do I do? The first thing I'll say is, I'm sorry. Welcome to the club. I went through it too. And welcome to the first step of the solution. And the solution is not easy, and the solution takes a while. And even when we have a path to walk down, there's going to be a lot of missteps on the solution, because while the goal, the pathway that we're walking to is a pathway towards vitality and health, it's a little bit different for everybody. My path isn't the same as your path, isn't the same as your partner's path, isn't the same as your friend's path. So a side note, often when we're on that path, people in their desire to help people, instead of saying, well, what makes you feel good? They're like, hey, you know what worked for me? It's like, eat goji berries every morning. That works for me. Or take some chrysanthemum tea, like that helps. Or, stop eating gluten. Gluten was the worst for me, and get sober. Like that's actually a good idea for a lot of people. But, essentially it's like what works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for everybody. What will work for everybody is for everybody to start to pay attention to what makes them feel good. You're not supposed to feel good by taking this supplement or this thing that somebody else offers you. You're supposed to try things and see what makes you feel good, and have a measurement about, did I sleep better? Are my bowels moving better? Is my rash a little bit better? Am I feeling better? How am I feeling? The asterisk to that is when we've really gotten to the point where our health is in shambles, there are usually a lot of big pieces we need to move out of the way before we start to feel better. It's like if you come into a hoarder's house, we have to clear out 20 years of clutter out of your system in order for it to start to look like it's getting better. So what do we do? What's the first step? It's like, let's clear out the clutter. How do we move out the clutter? Let's do everything we can to reduce the inflammation in our bodies. So first things first, how do we reduce inflammation in our bodies? Let's make sure we have enough purified, good, mineralized water that we're putting in our bodies, so that as we reduce our stress load and our toxic food load and our chemical load, that we have all access to good water that's mineralized, so we're flushing our bodies and getting all that stuff out. 2, let's go to food. The primary source of continued damage once we've already been damaged is going to be in our guts. If we can't eat in a way that we're absorbing good nutrition and eliminating all the inflammation in our body, when we think about digestion, it requires hydrochloric acid in our stomachs to break down our food. Hydrochloric acid is an acid, it causes inflammation. So in order to digest food, we actually need to have a little bit of inflammation, but we want to reduce any excess level of inflammation in our body in order to absorb the nutrition and not create pain or further damage. So how do we do that? We have to eat really high quality protein that's been cooked in a way that we can access it without needing to do too much work to digest it and absorb the nutrition. If you're totally healthy and you've like been living on the beach, going to 200-hour yoga teacher trainings in Tulum and in Costa Rica, then you can probably get away with being on a raw food diet. If you're a modern mammal stress monkey living in society, trying to support a family, be in the world and exist, like raw food diet, not for you. We evolved and we learned how to use our opposable thumbs and make fire. And one of the great things about making fire is one of the most amazing ways to unlock nutrition from our foods. So eating properly prepared cooked foods, like warm soupy foods, especially when our guts are totally inflamed, is a great way to start to absorb more nutrition at the same time reducing the amount of inflammation that we have. We want soup or stew made from a good pasture-raised meat broth, either chicken or beef. We want in that pasture-raised meat, not too much, just a little bit, like the stew meat's fine, just slow cooked so it's really tender, so we've released a lot of the collagen, so we've absorbed protein into the solution. And then also just like some leafy green vegetables, fresh, local leafy green vegetables. If you can handle the added histamine, you can add some fermented foods to it. But really, if you're totally, past the point of being able to digest food, the only thing that you can eat is actually like not that long cooked bone broth, so short cooked bone broth. When you cook bone broth for a long time, especially if you put a little bit of vinegar in it in order to get the calcium off the bones, when you cook it for a long time, it releases a lot of histamine. If you are hypersensitive and very advanced stages of autoimmune disease, your reactivity to histamine is going to be terrible. It's going to make you feel bloated. It's going to make you feel terrible. So the bone broth that you're going to eat, it's not like these like 14 and 16 hours cooked broths, which are super collagen rich and have all the nutrition that someone with regular digestion will benefit from. In your case, you can only have a bone broth that was lightly simmered, never even brought to a hard boil, except maybe for the first 10 minutes of the cook. It can only be lightly simmered for about 4 hours before the histamine levels start to ramp up in the broth. Another thing is fresh food. Fresh food is incredibly important. You can't, as soon as you prepare food, cook food, and then leave it without, if it's not frozen, all of the aging process and leftover food starts to create histamine. So really it's important to eat fresh food, and if you're not going to eat the whole thing, freeze it and then defrost it real quickly and then eat it if you want to avoid inflammation. Salt. Use good salt and use plenty of it. Most of us are really salt deficient, even though, and what salt do we use? We want either natural sea salt, and there's a lot of argument as to whether ocean water is even clean anymore. Does, some nice finishing salt that's, made in Europe or in Asia, does it have microplastics in it? The answer is probably does. And sadly, you're exposed to way more microplastics than we ever should have been. But that's a bigger fish to fry. If we're increasing the level of sodium in our body, we're actually going to be able to push the detox pathways open a little bit more. So the addition of mineral water and then adding a good amount of sea salt to your food and to your diet is going to be helpful. If you want to add even more sodium to your diet in a healthy way, and sodium has this people with high sodium have high blood pressure, and yes, this isn't for everybody, but if we're trying to detox our bodies, adding a pink mine salt, such as like pink Himalayan salt, or the Redmond salt from Utah, that's also an option. Again, if you start going down the message board world, some of those people are like, well, the salt has lead in it, has trace amounts of lead. It absolutely can have trace amounts of lead in it. Most of the lead comes from the drilling implements they're using to mine the salt. So one of the ways to get around that is to make a solution called Cellular, where you get like a big chunks of Himalayan rock salt and you soak them in water till it's a salt saturated solution, and you just use a teaspoon to put that in your water until it tastes soft. So the way you get around the lead issue is you rinse off the salt chunks before you put them in the spring water to soak. So the outer surface that may have been exposed to lead and other heavy metals has been cleaned off. This is a giant topic, this topic of eating. And it's also a topic that I never intended to know a lot about, but because it's so important to our well-being and our health and our vitality, learning about food and how to prepare food and how to prepare it well and how to understand where food comes from and therefore who are the farmers and the ranchers making our food has become a big part of my own healing process. And it's my plan to make a course about healing autoimmune disease and learning how to cook. So if you'd like to know more about that, put a comment in the section below. And we are actively working on it. What else do we do when we're trying to heal our autoimmune disease? Learning how to be connected to ourselves, learning how to know what we're feeling and to acknowledge what we're feeling is a big part of that. A lot of us are sick and we haven't even listened to our bodies telling us that they're sick until it's creating so many symptoms that we just can't deal with it. So if we're really sick, it's time for us to look at what's working and what's not working in our life. And these can be really big things. It might be a career change. It might be a real moment where you get to be vulnerable with someone you love and they might not be the person for you to be around anymore. It might be doing some work to start to deal with some unprocessed trauma in your past. It may be really doing some work to figure out how to make your relationship better, your primary relationship better, whether that's with your parents or with your partner. It may be needing to do some work around your children. That's a tough one because your children are always going to be a perfect reflection of you. Well, every child chooses their parents and every parent gets exactly the child they deserve. It really may be something simple like doing that thing you've always wanted to do that you've never really let yourself do. It might be confronting your fear of failure at following a path that you want to follow versus the path that you're on. There's so many of these, and these are the things that require, it doesn't have to be an acupuncturist, but it's finding the healer, it's finding the person, finding that person who can listen to what's inside of you or who knows enough and is skillful enough to start to move past your story and get the real things out of you. To find that person in order to allow yourself to discover what's inside of me. Like, what do I actually really have in here that I'm afraid to look at? And it seems almost cliche or like, okay, you just have to listen to the true version inside of yourself, find that voice inside of you. And it's true, it's that simple. Like we can overcomplicate our lives with all of our responsibilities and all of the hats we need to wear to be everything we need to be for everybody else. But to really find that version of ourselves, like what do we really want? Some of us have figured it out innately. And as a result, there's a little bit more coherence and success in our lives. Some of us have really not figured it out yet, and we're really trying hard. Like we've tried everything and we haven't quite gotten there yet. And this is why it takes sometimes another person to be with you, to not judge you, to help you find those things you can't find in yourself yet. I hope you found this video useful and informative, and maybe it opened up some new ways of approaching something you're dealing with or someone you know is dealing with, and a new way for you to be present to it. You know, one thing that you can start off with right away, just, you know, to make your body cleaner and healthier is like when you wake up in the morning, drink a cup of mineralized water first thing. Like a cup of water with half a teaspoon of the Soleil in it, you know, just a little bit to taste, and drink that down before you do anything else, before you have your coffee, before you start eating your breakfast, and see what that does. You know, drop a comment, let me know how you're feeling. If you do that and then you add a cup of bone broth in the morning, try that, see how you feel. That should give you some more energy, some protein to play with. And, you know, again, we love your comments, we love your insights, share what your experiences are and help us figure out what to share next.